Somebody asks you for something and you say yes before you have finished hearing the sentence. Not because you thought about it, because there was no gap between the question and the answer in which thinking could have happened. The yes was already there. You're the person people message when they need something. You're the one who covers the shift, listens at midnight, remembers the birthday, replies within 4 minutes, drives to the airport. If somebody in your life is having a difficult week, you know about it, and you're probably doing something about it. And there is a specific experience that comes with this which almost nobody who has it can describe out loud without sounding like they are complaining. You are exhausted, and you're not sure you're especially loved. You have a great many people. What you do not have on the day something goes wrong for you is a clear sense of who to call. That combination confuses people because it seems to contradict itself. You give constantly, you should be surrounded. And in a sense you are, and in another sense the whole thing feels strangely thin. There is a piece of research that explains that contradiction precisely. And there's a second finding, much stranger, about what actually causes one person to become fond of another, and it suggests that the thing you have been doing for years to earn affection runs in the opposite direction from the way you assumed. I will come back to it, because it is the part that changes what you do next. Start with a distinction, because without it this whole video becomes an attack on kindness, and that is not what the research says. In the 1990s, Vicki Helgeson and Heidi Fritz were working on a problem in psychology. Women are diagnosed with depression at higher rates than men, and one long-standing explanation was that traditionally feminine traits were responsible, caring, nurturing, focusing on relationships. The obvious hypothesis was that being oriented toward other people made you vulnerable. The problem was that the data did not support it. When researchers measured what they called communion, the caring, warm, relationship-oriented trait, it was not related to psychological distress. It was related to good things: better marital quality, greater perceived support. Caring about people, it turned out, was fine. So Helgeson and Fritz proposed that everyone had been measuring the wrong thing. They argued there was a second trait, sitting close beside communion, that had been getting mixed in with it. They called it unmitigated communion. Unmitigated communion is a focus on an involvement with others to the exclusion of the self. That last clause is the entire video. To the exclusion of the self. Across a series of studies they showed the two traits are correlated, so they travel together and also clearly distinct. And the distinction shows up hardest in the outcomes. Communion is not related to psychological or physical health. Unmitigated communion is related to both, and not in a good way. It has been linked to psychological distress, to depressive symptoms, and to poorer physical health across cross-sectional and longitudinal research. So the thing that costs you is not the caring. It is a specific variant of caring that has a particular structure, and the structure is what matters. They identified two components. The first is over-involvement with others. Not just helping, but being drawn into other people's problems past the point of usefulness. Being overly nurturant. Being intrusive. And here's a detail from their work I find genuinely striking. People high in unmitigated communion report having intrusive thoughts about another person's problems days after those problems were disclosed to them. Days later, somebody tells you about a difficulty on Tuesday. On Friday, in the middle of doing something entirely unrelated. Their situation surfaces in your mind, and you find yourself turning it over again. You did not choose to. It arrived. If you have ever wondered why you feel so tired after a week in which nothing actually happened to you, that is a serious part of the answer. You have been running background processes on other people's lives. You are not carrying your own week. You are carrying 4 or 5. The second component is neglect of the self. In this research that shows up as difficulty with assertion, failing to take care of your own health, and being overly accommodating when negotiating on your own behalf. Read that middle one again, because people skip past it. Failing to take care of your own health. The person who reminds everyone else about their appointments is measurably less likely to attend their own. So the picture is two-sided. Enormous attention pointed outward, and a self that has quietly dropped off the list of people being looked after. Which raises the obvious question, and it is the one that matters most. Why would somebody do this? The easy answer is that they are selfless, and I do not think that is right. The research points somewhere much more specific and considerably more sympathetic. Fritz and Helgeson found that unmitigated communion involves a negative view of the self and a tendency to turn to others for self-evaluative information. That phrase, self-evaluative information, is doing a lot of work. It means the answer to the question, am I all right, is not something you can generate internally. It has to come from outside, from how someone reacted. Whether they seemed pleased, whether they came back. And they found that this reliance on others for self-esteem is what actually accounts for the link to distress. The reliance produces the over-involvement and the self-neglect, and those in turn produce the distress. Follow that chain because it explains everything about the behavior. If your sense of being an acceptable person depends on other people's responses, then every request that arrives is not really a request. It is an opportunity to receive the evidence, and every refusal is not really a refusal. It is a decision to go without the evidence on purpose, which is an extremely difficult thing to do when the evidence is the only source you have. That is why the yes arrives before the thinking. There was nothing to think about. Declining was never genuinely on the menu. And it explains something else, which is why the exhaustion does not stop the behavior. Being tired is not a reason to stop, because stopping does not just cost you rest, it costs you the thing you have been using to feel acceptable. Now, one thing to be careful about, because this research has a gender dimension and it gets misreported. Helgeson and Fritz developed the construct while explaining why women show higher rates of depression, and unmitigated communion does account for some of that difference. It is associated with traditional gender socialization, but it is a trait, not a category. Men score on it too. Plenty of men are the person everybody calls, and they tend to have even less language for it, because the version of this that shows up as never refusing work, never admitting difficulty, and never asking for help does not get recognized as the same pattern. So this is not a video about women. It is a video about a measurable trait that gets encouraged in some people more than others. Now, the finding I promised, and it is the one that reorganizes the whole thing. Everything so far describes a cost. Availability is tiring, it involves self-neglect, and it is fueled by needing external confirmation. But that still leaves the strategy intact. Exhausting, perhaps, but presumably effective. You give a great deal and people become fond of you. That is the deal. The research on how fondness actually forms suggests the deal does not work the way you think. In 1969, John Jecker and David Landy ran an experiment published in the journal Human Relations, testing an observation Benjamin Franklin had made about 200 years earlier. Franklin had a rival in the Pennsylvania Assembly, a man who disliked him. Rather than doing the rival a kindness to win him over, Franklin did the opposite. He wrote and asked to borrow a rare book from the man's library. The book arrived. Franklin returned it a week later, with a warm note of thanks. After that, the man spoke to him with great civility, and according to Franklin, they became friends for life. Franklin's conclusion was that he who has once done you a kindness will be more ready to do you another than he whom you yourself have obliged. Jecker and Landy tested it. They ran a question-and-answer competition where students could win money. Afterwards, 1/3 of the winners were approached directly by the researcher, who explained he had funded the prizes himself and was running short, and asked them personally to return the money. Another third were asked to return it by a secretary on behalf of the department. The final third were not approached at all. Then all three groups were asked how much they liked the researcher. The group who had done him a personal favor liked him the most. The group asked by an intermediary liked him the least. Sit with what that means. The people who gave something up, at the direct request of the person, ended up with warmer feelings toward him than the people who kept the money. The favor ran one way, and the affection ran the same way, from the giver toward the receiver. The usual explanation involves cognitive dissonance. Your mind does not comfortably hold, I did something generous for this person alongside, I have no particular feelings about them. Something has to move, and it is easier to adjust the feeling than to undo the action. So you conclude you must like them. Later work refined it. The effect appears stronger for social requests like asking for advice than for transactional ones, and it tends to work best when the request comes reasonably early in knowing someone. Now bring that back to the person who is available to everybody. For years, you have been operating on an assumption that giving produces affection, that if you're useful enough, reliable enough, present enough, people will become attached to you. The Franklin research suggests giving produces affection reliably in the giver. Every favor you have done has increased your own attachment to the person you did it for. You have spent years manufacturing genuine fondness, and almost all of it has been fondness flowing outward from you. Meanwhile, the mechanism that would generate their attachment to you, which is you asking them for something, is the one thing you have systematically never done. You have not been building a network of people who are devoted to you. You have been building a network of people you're devoted to. And you have been doing it very effectively, which is why you can name everybody who needs you and struggle to name who to call. I want to be careful about how that lands, because there is a version of this that turns nasty, and I do not want to produce it. This does not mean people are using you. It does not mean nobody cares about you, and it emphatically does not mean the answer is to give less in order to make yourself scarce and therefore more valuable, which is advice that circulates constantly and is both manipulative and wrong. The finding is narrower and stranger than that. There is a mechanism by which people become attached to each other. It is powered by asking as much as by giving, and you have been running it in one direction only, which points at what to actually do, and it is not what people expect. The instruction usually offered here is to set boundaries and learn to say no. That advice fails for a specific reason. It targets the behavior while leaving the engine untouched. If your sense of being an acceptable person is coming from other people's responses, then saying no is not a boundary. It is a decision to give up the supply, and you will manage it for about 9 days. 3 things follow more usefully from the research. The first is the distinction we started with. The target is not caring less. Communion, the ordinary warm version, is associated with good outcomes. The thing linked to distress is the specific variant that excludes the self, which means you're not trying to become colder. You're trying to add exactly one person to the list of people you take seriously, and you already know who is missing. The second concerns the intrusive thoughts, and it is worth naming clearly. Turning somebody's problem over in your mind on Friday, 3 days after they told you, does nothing for them. They cannot feel it. It does not help. That processing is entirely a cost with no corresponding benefit anywhere in the world, and noticing that does not stop it. But it does change what it is. It is not loyalty. It is a background process you did not authorize. The third is the practical one, and it follows directly from Franklin. Ask someone for something small, not because it manipulates them into liking you, because the research suggests that being asked is one of the ways people become attached, and you have been withholding that from everyone you know on the belief that it would be an imposition. Ask for advice rather than a favor, since that is where the effect appears strongest. And notice what happens when you do, because for most people who live this way, the surprising part is not that the other person says yes, it is how pleased they are to have been asked. That reaction is information. It tells you something about your standing with them that years of giving has never told you, because giving does not produce that information. Only asking does. And if the availability is at a level that is genuinely damaging you, if it is affecting your health, your sleep, or your ability to function, that is worth taking to a professional. Not because helping people is a disorder, but because this is a well-documented pattern with a well-documented mechanism, and there are approaches that address the engine rather than the behavior, which is what actually needs to change. Here's the reframe worth carrying out of this. You have probably assumed that being available to everyone is generosity, that the tiredness is the price of being a good person, and the strange thinness underneath it is either ingratitude on their part or something wrong with you. The research suggests something different, and it is neither of those. 2 people can perform the identical helpful act. One is doing it from communion, which is warmth with a self still in it, and it costs them nothing they cannot afford. The other is doing it from unmitigated communion, which is the same act with the self removed, and it is quietly expensive from outside. Those 2 people look exactly the same. They are not. The difference is not how much you give. It is whether there's anybody left in the arrangement who is also being given to, and you have spent years being the person everybody can rely on, while running the one strategy that reliably produces devotion and pointing all of it away from yourself. That is the cue most people miss. If you're the person everybody calls, leave a comment and tell me the last time somebody asked how you were and waited for the real answer. Subscribe to Psychology Q, and I will keep showing you the signals hiding in plain sight.